So I've been playing Arknights Endfield for a week now, and I think I've gone through enough of the content to really get an honest feel of the game. I'll be honest, when I first started the game, I was not having a good time. The story was pretty boring and basic. The combat felt like I was a mosquito hitting a giant sack of meat. The factory sim just felt annoying, especially with all the tutorials they force you through. And the gacha felt so convoluted that I feel like it was made that way on purpose to just confuse people into spending money that they didn't have. But I kept on playing, and before I realized it, I literally spent 3 hours setting up a production chain in the factory sim, and I realized I was pretty hooked. If a game has the capacity to completely distract me like that, I think it's doing something right. I am a fan of these kinds of games. I enjoy creating efficient systems and spending time studying numbers to ensure I don't waste resources. All in all, this is my kind of mechanic. But I couldn't really enjoy it in this game because of all the god-awful tutorials. You get tutorials for every single little thing. Every time you open a new window, you get a new tutorial. I mean, you also get tutorials to get two tutorials, so you can do another tutorial, and when you finish that tutorial, you can end up in another tutorial, creating an infinite loop of tutorials, and I was about to lose my damn mind. But once you stick it through, and you finally get the freedom to just do whatever you want, I found myself having a great time. There were moments where I would look at a clock and realize I've been sitting in the same area for hours trying to organize some sort of system, and I think that's an indication of a good game. It wasn't just the factory sim alone. I also spent time running everywhere, connecting power lines to different locations, building zip lines and mining nodes, and it was just an absolutely good time. I can see there being people not enjoying this game mode and want to focus more on the other aspects of the game. And to that, the developers actually developed a blueprint system that you can share with other players so you don't have to spend time making something if you don't want to. So the factory sim, very well thought out and developed, and this is important because this is where my opinion of the game started to change. So what about the combat? My original plan was simple. I figured I'd worry about team building later and just power through the story. I was running Endman, Perlica, Chen, and Wolfguard, and I dumped almost all my resources into the administrator, thinking I could just brute force every fight. I was very, very wrong. Enemies were taking forever to die, fights felt slow, and even when I was out leveling things, it felt like I was slapping enemies with a wet noodle. And that's when I decided to really look at team synergy and craft a team around the administrator. The administrator's kit is actually built around his skill that crushes enemies. Crush applies vulnerability stacks, and if he uses his battle skill again, he can consume that vulnerability stack to deal even more damage. So the question became, who can I use to help boost this particular skill aspect of this kit? That's when I actually started reading other characters' kits. Ardelia, for example, you get her for free, can apply corrosion with her combo ability. If you consume that corrosion with her skill, it turns into a physical arts debuff on the enemy. Now, the enemy's taking more damage. On top of that, the administrator's combo attack attaches crystals to the enemy. If he consumes those crystals with his battle skill, he gains even more attack boost and deals more physical damage. Then you add Chen into the mix, who can apply even more vulnerability stacks with her skill and combo ability. So now you have enemies taking more physical and arts debuff, multiple vulnerability stacks being applied, crystals being attached and consumed, all of it feeding into the administrator's crush damage. And suddenly fights that felt like a slog started ending very quickly. That's when combat started to click for me. There's actually a surprising amount of depth here if you're willing to engage with it. Eventually though, I got distracted by the gacha banners. I have a long history of re-rolling in gacha games, and I told myself I wouldn't do it here. I caved. I spent 2 full days re-rolling and eventually did get Leviathan, time well spent. But now I have to do the whole process again, figure out how to build a team around her, and I actually do enjoy doing it now. I literally had a piece of paper next to me writing down rotations and timings to stack enough fire inflictions so I could use her enhanced skill to charge her ult as fast as possible and literally just kill everything. That's when I knew the combat in this game was pretty good. I didn't like it at first, but once you understand the systems and build a proper team, it becomes very fun. And then I hit the last boss of Valley 4, and I got absolutely wrecked. 2 phases, both hit like a truck, and I realized very quickly that I had made a huge mistake. I had built my main DPS, I had not built the rest of my team. So when my main character died, I couldn't even leave the field. I just had to sit there and watch the rest of my team get slapped around until they fell over. After losing twice, I started wondering if this was the point where the game was telling me to stop. So I went back to the factory and I just stared at my characters. And I realized I definitely had a lot of things I could improve. Everyone's levels, skills, gear. So I spent the next few hours setting up factory lines for the materials I needed, doing deliveries for money, and running around the map collecting rare resources to upgrade everyone properly, all while studying my rotation. And then I went back in. And to no one's surprise, if you actually build your team correctly and dodge attacks, you don't die immediately. So the story takes place in the same universe as the original Arknights. Instead of playing as the Doctor, you play as the Administrator, which is certainly a title. Now, how this connects to the first game, I'm not entirely sure. I watched a lore recap video, and it involved portals, a cosmic entity trying to eat everyone, a lot of survival, and something about rock cancer. It was a lot. But honestly, it's a pretty interesting universe if you've taken the time to learn about it beforehand. Because if you haven't, the opening region of Endfield's story is really nothing special. You wake up as the Administrator, a legendary genius who created a bunch of life-saving systems, helped people survive disasters, and then went into hibernation for 10 years. And of course, you wake up with amnesia, which is actually a good setup. It lets the player learn about the world alongside the main character. What's kind of funny though is how everyone you meet absolutely glazes you, but it makes sense. To them, you're basically a myth, a hero from the stories they've only heard about. So when you wake up, Valley 4 is in chaos. Bandits called the Landbreakers are running around. Mysterious anchors are falling from the sky, spawning monsters everywhere. And all of it is clearly tied to some larger bad guy pulling the strings. So most of the story is you running around saving people, setting up factory infrastructure, and fighting back the threat to stop everything from collapsing. And while none of this is bad, it's also not very memorable. It feels like a plot you've seen in a lot of sci-fi gacha games before, and it's just kind of meh. But I will say, the climax of the region was actually pretty exciting, and knowing how deep the Arknights universe goes from the first game makes me interested to see where this goes later. The potential is definitely there. I also think the cinematics are fantastic. The first time you meet Wolfguard is a great example. They do action sequences very well. My biggest gripe though is the voice acting. I understand not voicing every single quest, but I hate when a quest starts voiced and then halfway through becomes silent. And the main character is randomly voiced and unvoiced, like they ran out of budget halfway through recording. And this game supposedly had a massive budget, I think like 100 million or so. At this point, either voice everything or just make the main characters stay silent. There are a lot of other smaller touches in the game that I really like. The companions, for example, explore the world with you, which is nice. They have random voice lines as you run around, which can get a little repetitive since there aren't that many of them, but it still makes the world feel alive.
Another day of beautiful sounds.
Also like the fact that when you're farming resource nodes, they'll actually run over and start hitting the nodes with you and even pick things up. It's a small detail, but it's nice. They'll even help point out chests around the map too. Traversal is also interesting because Enfield goes in a completely different direction from most open world gacha games. There's no glider, no flying, no vehicles, and I think that's fine. Instead, the game leans into zip lines as your main way of getting around, and I actually ended up liking this a lot. You can create your own routes to important resource spots and recycling locations, which ties back nicely into the factory and daily material loop. One thing I didn't like though is when you find other players' structures in your world. Some of them are helpful, like zip lines to places you haven't reached yet. Others are just annoying. For example, people will place random turrets near enemy camps. The problem there is those turrets will aggro enemies while you're just trying to gather resources nearby, which throws you into combat and forces you to finish the fight before you can go back to doing what you were doing. There really needs to be a toggle for that. There's also a separate game mode that feels like a semi-roguelike where you explore a different landscape using the team you've built. As you explore, there's a danger meter that slowly fills up. The issue is that the meter goes up just from you existing. I had a moment where I was in the middle of a boss fight and the meter maxed out and the game just booted me out. I'd much rather the meter just go up after fights or when you interact with objects and chests, not just for breathing the air. That said, it's a pretty decent mode overall, but I don't know, I need to play it more to really decide whether it's good or not. Now, let's talk about Enfield's gacha system. Gacha is still one of the worst things to happen to the gaming industry, but it's here, so the only thing we can really do is judge whether it's fair or not. If you're playing this game, you probably already understand how gacha works, so I won't explain the basics. Enfield's character banner uses a 50-50 pity at 80 pulls. If you lose that, you're guaranteed the featured character at 40 more pulls, totaling out at 120 pulls. The main issue people have here is that the progress towards the 120 pity does not carry over to the next banner. Personally, I don't think this is a deal breaker, but I usually save enough pulls to guarantee a character anyways. And that said, I would definitely feel better if leftover pity does carry forward. One thing is that when the banner ends, that character doesn't disappear completely. They stay in the 50-50 pool for the next two banners, so you still have a chance to get them if you're lucky. The weapon system is where Enfield does something a bit different. Weapons use a completely separate currency called Arsenal currency, and you earn this by pulling on character banners. You get 2,000 for pulling a 6-star, 200 for a 5-star, and 40 for a 4-star. There is a downside here. If you get very lucky on the character banner, you won't earn much Arsenal currency for the weapons. That's fair criticism. To offset this, there is a weekly shop that lets you buy a random 6-star outright instead of pulling for it. So I assume if you miss the banner, it will show up again down the line. The problem is it's more expensive than a 10 pull, and since the weapon is random, you don't know how long you have to wait for the one you actually want. Even with that, I still prefer this system. I like that the weapon progression is separate from character pulls and that there's an alternative way to obtain them without another gacha layer. So I think gacha as a concept is terrible for games overall. Compared to a lot of other gacha systems out there, Enfield's implementation it's fine. So after a full week of Arknights Endfield, I think the best way I can describe the game is that it's a slow burn. This is not a game that grabs you on the first hour. It's not a game that overwhelms you with a crazy story intro. It's not a game where the combat immediately feels amazing. In fact, my first impression was almost entirely negative. I thought the story was boring, I thought the combat was bad, I thought the factory system was annoying mainly because of the tutorials. I thought the gacha was confusing. And somehow this game turned me into a guy who spent 3 hours optimizing conveyor belts and writing combat rotations down on a piece of paper. That's when I realized Enfield's biggest strength isn't any one feature, it's how all of its systems are tied together. The factory isn't just some side activity you can ignore, a huge part of your progression runs through it. It feeds your gear determines how strong your team actually feels, and your team building decides whether combat feels slow and frustrating or fast and satisfying. The game will absolutely punish you if you try to ignore any of it. You can't brute force Enfield, you have to engage with it. And once you do, the game starts to open up in a way that's actually very rewarding. The moment that really sold me was the Valley 4 boss. Losing to that boss wasn't frustrating because the fight was unfair. It was frustrating because I knew I hadn't properly interacted with the systems the game had given me. So I went back and sat at my hub base and I interacted with everything. I improved my factory lines, I upgraded my gear, I built my team correctly, I learned my rotations, and when I came back and beat that boss, I felt very satisfied. That's something a lot of gacha games don't do very well. A lot of them let you get away with just over-leveling a single unit and calling it a day. Endfield doesn't let you do that. It asks you to think. Now, that doesn't mean the game is perfect. The opening story is average, tutorials are way too aggressive, the voice acting inconsistency is noticeable, and gacha is still gacha. But underneath all of that is a game with genuinely well-designed systems that respect your time if you're willing to understand them. And that's what surprised me the most. I came into this expecting another open world gacha with some light base building tacked on. What I found was a game where the base building, the combat, the exploration, and the progression all feel intentionally designed to work together. Endfield doesn't make a great first impression, but if you stick with it long enough for the systems to click, it becomes very hard to put down. And for me, any game that can turn frustration into 3 hours of happily organizing a factory floor is doing something very right. Arknights Endfield is definitely worth your time, but of course not your money. Don't waste all your money on gacha games, guys, please. But thanks for watching. My name's been Suka. I'll see you guys in the next one. See ya.